Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm Landon Darren, Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center and Richard Morningstar Chair for Global Energy Security. Really thrilled to be together with the audience here in person today and those joining us online for a really important milestone of the year at the Global Energy Center at the Council. We're launching our Global Energy Agenda for 2024. It's our seminal event of setting the global energy agenda, thinking about the geopolitical consequence of competitive, what's competitive in the global market, how our energy security and actually just general global security events affecting the pace of transition. And we take the time to reach out to a number of global leaders to compile their thoughts through a series of essays. We reach out to even more energy experts and climate experts to take a pulse through a survey, and we compile that to really have a conversation and set what we're thinking about for 2024, set the ambition, set the benchmarks, and really keep driving forward. So it's one single milestone, but it's really a continuation of a much broader conversation. And to continue that today, really excited to bring together a panel discussion and one particular leader who can help us kick it off as we think through the global energy agenda for 2024. It's my pleasure to welcome the Director of the Loan Programs Office at the U.S. Department of Energy, Jigar Shah. Jigar, welcome.
Thanks, Landon. I think we were supposed to set the global energy agenda, but appreciate all of the extraordinary thoughts and just the care by which you guys put together your reports. They're very informative and really trend-setting. I'd also love to thank Dr. Gordon, who works closely with my office here from the Atlantic Council, who works tirelessly on nuclear power, which is probably an uphill climb, but she's willing to make it, and really appreciate her leadership there. Really want to thank everybody for being here today. It's a really exciting time. I think, as many people know, the Ukraine conflict really threw the world energy markets into a point of uncertainty. I think today we return back to a point of relative stability. When you think about all the conflicts happening in the world today, it's surprising to many people that oil prices, natural gas prices, other prices have stabilized. And I think that is really a testament to leadership shown by many countries around the world, including, of course, the United States. One of the other pieces of this, though, is that based on the leadership that we've seen from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, I think you see a real optimism today that frankly wasn't there before those bills passed around our ability to commercialize technologies across the spectrum, right? So when you think about where solar and wind are today, they're clearly in a commanding position, and you saw that with the State of Europe work around 19% reduction in fossil fuel emissions this last year, historic deployments of heat pumps. When you think about what the art of the possible is, I think there's a lot of optimism and good news there. You also saw in the last year, that solar and wind investments exceeded oil and gas investments on an annual basis, and that is expected to continue going into this year. I think that's a testament to the work that folks have done over the last 20 years around the learning curve, around the bridge to bankability, around getting those technologies as well as battery storage and electric vehicles into a position where they can scale to a relative gigaton scale basis. Today, we're doing the same for the next generation of technologies. So when you think about where we are in nuclear power, I would suggest that it really wasn't something that was front of mind 3 years ago. But today, coming out of the last COP, we have 22 countries that have talked about tripling the capacity of nuclear power within their own countries. That would be another 200 gigawatts of nuclear power here in the United States. But we're also looking at enhanced geothermal, huge announcement on Monday around huge progress of bridging the hydraulic fracturing industry and the geothermal industry to really use that best-in-class technology to bring down the cost of enhanced geothermal. So today, I would say almost everyone is optimistic around geothermal being a solution that we're going to be scaling up here in this country. And the last piece I would say is when you think about the stability of the U.S. electricity grid and our desire to double electricity sales needed to support data centers, all of the manufacturing facilities coming out of the IRA and bill, as well as home electrification growth, business electrification growth. I think you see a level of seriousness now around technologies that, frankly, we've had for 30 years, right? Things like grid-enhancing technologies, whether it's dynamic line ratings or smart wires, or when you think about virtual power plants and the ability to fluctuate load at the same level of dexterity that we've traditionally only fluctuated supply. I think you're seeing a level of enthusiasm from throughout the electric utility sector around deploying these technologies now. Today, the Loan Programs Office is up to over $100 billion of loan requests in our 1706 Energy Infrastructure Reinvestment Program, which is really an extraordinary feat, 80 billion of those loans coming in over the last 2 months alone. And so I think you're starting to see a level of seriousness, not just about the R&D and the demonstration part of these technologies, but also the full deployment at relevant scale. So with that, we're excited about the promise, really, I think, of energy, but also the promise of American leadership in this moment where we have, for 45 years, had the best technologies in the world, but there had been some that questioned whether we wanted to commercialize those technologies here. Those questions have now been put to rest. I think we are commercializing those technologies here and exporting those technologies around the world. The last thing I would say is that there's been an extraordinary amount of work done by the Department of Energy around figuring out what this public-private partnership really looks like. And a lot of those conversations have actually been crystallized, I'd say, within the liftoff reports that we've put out. One of the more famous ones that folks are talking about is a nuclear liftoff report, which I think for the first time has provided a real clarity around all of the hard steps that we need to take to really bring in integrated project delivery models, figuring out how we actually go from first of a kind to nth of a kind cost structures, figuring out how we bring local fuel supply here into this country, and all of the other relevant, really extraordinary steps. And that gets replicated into virtual power plants, carbon management, hydrogen, long-duration energy storage. Very soon, we're going to be coming out with our geothermal liftoff report and grid modernization liftoff reports. And each one of these reports, the industrial decarb one, which I forgot to mention, that they've all been really important in galvanizing private sector capital around these sectors. As many people know, the free market approach is one that we fully embrace. We're private sector led, government enabled, but figuring out how to make 30-year investments within that framework without some leadership from the public sector becomes very difficult. And so I think these reports have served to be a real anchor and foundational piece upon which people can agree on the fact base and then figure out how to have good conversations around how to assemble the rest of the investment criteria to confidently move forward. So with that, thank you very much for having me. Just really an amazing amount of leadership that you've provided, not only within the new document, but also all year. So thank you for that.
Josh Siegel with Politico. We're now going to have our wonderful panel discuss some of the top major topics in the agenda. So, we have Kimberly Harrington with the U.S. Department of State. She's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Energy Diplomacy of the Bureau of Energy Resources. We have Cara Mangone. She is the head of the Sustainability Finance Group with Goldman Sachs. And then we have Michelle Petrone. She's the Senior Director of Sustainability Policy at Microsoft. So we will get right in here. So of course, the energy landscape of 2024 is set against a backdrop of major shifts in technological progress and growing geopolitical and economic stress. So what are the biggest challenges that you would say are facing the energy transition right now? Leave it to any of you to kick that off.
I'm happy to start. Sure. I think geopolitical shocks have been very significant. So I would put the overarching impact we're facing under an umbrella of economics. Jigar talked a lot about commercial viability in his remarks, and that's a really critical component of energy transition. Within the economics umbrella, there's been a few impacts that are really challenging the energy transition, and these, I will say, these are all outlined in the report that the Atlantic Council put out, which I thought was really, really good and is absolutely worth a read. One is you have the very direct impact of geopolitical shocks impacting the way that governments think about their ability to deliver on energy transition goals, right? So you have a world in which governments need to weigh energy security and reliability, energy affordability, and of course, reducing emissions. And so the ambition is really there, and we saw that, I think, at COP at the end of last year, but the execution is very challenging. And when you're in a world where you're facing those different three legs of the stool and you need to optimize, of course, you're going to think very heavily about how do I get secure, reliable energy that's affordable to my citizens. I think the second headwind that we have is more related to rising rates and inflation. That does change the economics around decarbonization. If you think about impact to supply chain, critical minerals, inputs that you need to execute on decarbonization, that's certainly a challenge. And then I think probably the elephant in the room, but the obvious point of energy demand is rising, it's not falling. And I'm sure we're going to talk, we have Microsoft here, so I'm sure we're going to talk about AI and things like that are estimated to increase energy demand. But that's certainly a challenge. So right now, roughly 80% of our world's energy comes from conventional energy sources. That's really the backbone at this point. And so there have been incredible progress around decarbonization and renewables. Jigar mentioned the increased renewables capacity. We've hit, I think, close to $2 trillion last year in overall renewables, low carbon solution, energy transition investment, which is a record. But we're in a world where the demand is rising, right? So it's not a replacement, it's an addition.
I'm happy to jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, I want to thank the Atlantic Council for their leadership and also to Jigar and the Department of Energy for really putting an emphasis on public-private partnership. So for Microsoft, the landscape that we see in the transition, particularly the transition to a carbon-free electricity, is really shaped by the three roles that we play. The first is we are an electricity customer. We purchase electricity to power the data centers that make modern computing work. Early on, we recognized that that was an important responsibility to make sure that they were done in a carbon-free way. And so we've set a goal to match our consumption by 100% renewable by 2025, which used to seem a long time ago, but that is next year. We're well on our way. And as part of that, we've procured over 19 gigawatts of renewable energy. That's equivalent to about 10 Hoover Dams. The second is that we are an investor as part of our carbon negative commitment for our operations, our electricity, and our supply chain to be carbon negative by 2030. We also have a $1 billion climate innovation fund that is part of that public-private partnership in some ways, or also working with the financial sector where we are investing to help get some of these early stage technologies from the lab to the market. We've deployed about $700 million of that $1 billion in 50 companies or 50 investments. Some of them are these early stage clean energy investments like storage or like using AI to get more electricity transmitted on transmission lines. And the third is a solutions provider. So we provide digital solutions to utilities, to startups, to regulators that are in this space. And so that's kind of what informs how we're looking at the opportunities and challenges. Three key challenges are accelerating, right, a carbon-free generation, are modernizing and expanding the grid, and doing it in an equitable way. Kind of zeroing in the near term of the bigger challenge and kind of building on what Jigar Shah was talking about is that we've seen, because of the expansion of new clean energy renewable generation and other generation, and because of the demand signals that are being sent by onshoring manufacturing, by the supply chain, by digital technologies, we have electricity demand that is increasing, not just relative to historic rates, not just in the United States, but in Europe and around the world. And we have an infrastructure that's not really able to absorb all of that growth. And so kind of the key issue is really in grid planning, in grid expansion here in the United States and also around the world. And this happens to be a particularly tough challenge because it's a fragmented policy. There are pieces of policy responsibility that are at the federal level. There are pieces of policy responsibility that are at the state level. There are pieces of policy responsibility that are at the regional transmission organization level. And so there's a lot that needs to be leaned leaned in pretty quickly to solve in order to make sure that we're doing more effective planning so that we can build out the grid in the way that can move this clean electrons from where they need to be, where they're produced to where they need to be consumed.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah, yeah. So if I could just add a quick point, from the perspective of the State Department, I'm with the Bureau of Energy Resources. So certainly one of our big focuses over the past 2 years has been Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine and the incredible ripple effects on energy security across Europe, really across the world. So, ensuring Ukraine's energy security is our North Star and something we work on every single day. Now, of course, there have been incredible challenges that have come with this invasion and the ongoing war. But really, I think one of our big takeaways is that Russia is no longer seen as a reliable energy supplier. And therefore, Russia's ability to use energy as a weapon has truly been degraded by this war. And that is a point we make over and over. The United States and others have stepped up, have brought natural gas to Europe. There's a huge push for diversification of resources and diversification of energy resources. That is a silver lining to all of this. The other move really related to the energy transition, I would say, though, you might have seen this week in Paris, we had the 50th anniversary of the International Energy Agency, and European Commission President von der Leyen talked about the fact that Putin's war, Putin's invasion of Ukraine has really accelerated the energy transition in Europe, moved Europe faster to renewables than was ever conceived before. So there's always a silver lining to these geopolitical ups and downs. And then from our perspective, at the State Department, the other issue related to the energy transition that we're really focused on is critical minerals, right? And as is highlighted in the report, you can't talk about the clean energy transition without talking about lithium, cobalt, where it's refined, where it's processed, and of course the fact that a single country is really where a lot of it goes through, and the vulnerabilities that creates to the energy transition and to these technologies that are going to fuel the future.
Josh, I know we only have a limited amount of time, but I do want to highlight one feature from the report looking at 2023 is when it comes to conflict, we're going to have conflict and challenges, geopolitics, be a facet of the energy transition every year. And if you look just past the last 2 decades, whether it's the war on terrorism, the Great Recession, COVID, and then contemporary conflicts in Ukraine or in Israel, I think what you're seeing is what's interesting is we can persevere through it. So one observation that we showed that we shouldn't just look at these headwinds. We have to take them on. We have to realize that geopolitics and competitiveness are going to feature heavily and weigh heavily on how we achieve our aims, but they're not entirely inhibitors. And I think the world coming together in COP28 showed that you can still have a blueprint for success and move forward on the energy transition, irrespective of those challenges. Moving into 2024, however, and I think we'll spend some time talking about this, the scale of global elections obviously is probably the one thing on my mind that's going to have an impact in terms of, can we keep this harmony? Can we keep this effort to lead together, be as fortified as it was in 2023? And so there's some great thinking about that as well, but definitely maybe the greatest headwind I see in 2024.
Yeah, wanted to stay on that topic. Of course, 2024 is being called this ultimate election year, including, of course, our own election. But yeah, there's consequential elections across the world that'll have a meaningful impact on our ability to address climate change. So, how does industry, finance, government, how do you kind of overcome the potential political instability and potential, switch in parties or outlooks?
I'm happy to start. So, speaking from a company that is executing, has set a carbon target, that set a water target, set a waste target, set an ecosystems target, it's really about grounding it in the business. And the way that your strategy or your execution is grounded in business, not only does that help you navigate external headwinds, but also continues to strengthen internal buy-in. And so for us, it's a 3-pronged strategy, which is we're focused on getting our house in order and all of our operational sustainability. And what that means is reducing our carbon where we operate, where we have offices, where we have data centers, working with our suppliers. They happen to operate. That happens in various states across the United States and in countries around the world. The second piece is helping our customers with their own sustainability. So developing tools that allow them to help measure and manage their own footprint. And then working, to help support through investment and skilling and policy advocacy, global sustainability. And the reason I say it's a strategy that is grounded in our business is because we do operate in a lot of different states, which while we know 2024 is a big election year, we have weathered election change before. Let me give you two different examples. We have one state in Virginia where there was a political change in one way, and we have another state, Arizona, where we operate and have investments in clean energy where there was a change the other way. And we've been working through them by just continuing to work with our local utilities, continue to work with our public utility commissions, executing against our plan to keep these investments apace. And so at the end of the day, it's about working with local partners, having a really, really clear business strategy so you continue to execute against your goals regardless of where the political winds go.
I would just add, commercial viability, obviously, from a bank financing perspective is critical, right? So it's very hard for us to finance projects that are just not financeable, where the technology isn't there, it's too high risk, or we don't see the future returns. So this is a really important question. The Inflation Reduction Act has the potential to be very transformative for the economics of decarbonization. And you saw close to $500 billion of projects announced just in the first year on the back of specifically tied to the incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act. So it's really potentially a game changer. But companies and project developers will look at policy durability and stability. So that is something that they have to think about when they're looking at whether they're going to be able to fund this over a long cycle. I do think it's important to note that policy incentives are not the only way to get there. They are a very powerful component, and I think the government-enabled framework that Jigar mentioned is really important because it's an enabler. It can be an accelerant. If you're talking about moving faster and shifting economics, how do you get renewables, the cost of renewables down 60 to 90% over the course of the past 10 years? Certainly incentives played a very helpful role in that. But you also have things like innovation. You have the ability to really scale up procurement, right? Guaranteed contracts, things like that to really lock in demand. So I think some of that uncertainty does impact potentially timing. But there are other ways to drive that commercial viability vis-a-vis demand.
Just to stay on the IRA for a second, how concerned are you, though, about the durability of IRA? I know a lot of the tax credits are long-term, but some of the regulations are still being finalized, and we don't know. It's unclear if what a future Congress would think about the IRA, a future administration, depending on if there's a change there. So, are you confident in its durability? Are you able to go about your investment strategy?
Well, I won't speak to investment strategies. I'll maybe kick it back over to the left in a second here. But I would say, when you're looking at the durability of the legislation, I joined the Department of Energy the first time when we were running off the ARA, like the first iteration of stimulus. And it wasn't actually it wasn't in the system anymore, but the impact of that reverberated for a really long time. And the scale of the IRA is just so much more magnificent than even that initial salvo a decade ago. And so I think through, don't diminish the fact that the IRA is going to reverberate irrespective of politics. We just had Jigar on stage talking about some keynote remarks. The Loan Program Office was rolled back in the prior administration. There are avenues where maybe the actual apparatus to deploy the financing behind things can change. But there's a lot of benefits across sectors too. This is, the IRA doesn't just exclusively help renewable energy companies. There's a lot of oil and gas companies and others that are benefiting from this stimulus as well. So I think you're going to find a pretty persuasive imperative, regardless, for the IRA to keep moving forward.
Yeah, and I can just make a point on that. I meet with the heads of energy companies all around the world in my travels, and the bottom line is the IRA is very, very popular with the private sector, and it's creating an incredible amount of jobs in the United States. So it's going to be something that's going to be hard to reverse given its popularity. And then to the first question of just elections and democracy in this year, I would say, as a diplomat, I've lived and worked in the Middle East and Africa and Latin America. In my current job, I get to travel to all of those places all the time. And I do feel like regardless of elections, regardless of the political change that we're seeing, there is a deep understanding in every place I go to about the energy trilemma and the fact that climate change is the existential crisis of our time, and we have to meet growing energy demand and provide energy access, right? So I do feel like there's unanimity of purpose, even with political winds changing and potentially elections changing some.
The direction is going to stay the same. It's the scale and the place, and sometimes policy is able to be a force multiplier, like we are experiencing right now. There are times when policy sometimes takes a backseat, and it's other drivers that are pushing it forward. But I think the destination is very clear. The path is not going to be linear.
Gotcha. And then, yeah, transitioning to solutions to our energy challenges. So, clean energy, of course, is becoming more economic, strong, more and more so. According to the Global Energy Agenda survey that was mentioned at the top, 56% of respondents think that achieving net zero would lead to economic growth, but 63% say that we may not get there. So, Kara, this one's for you. What role does the financial sector play in encouraging investors to invest clean?
Yeah. Well, I think if you think about the end users and companies and who's really needs capital to finance energy transition, banks play, of course, a very important role in that. We can raise capital, so we can raise capital in funds that are investing in climate solutions. We can also raise capital in funds investing in energy transition, infrastructure. There are a lot of parts of the ecosystem where we can raise capital. We can provide financing, and we can help risk manage. If you think about critical minerals and commodities, that's a very linked part of the business that's really important. Of course, we advise companies, including some very large acquisitions. We advised Chevron on its acquisition of Renewable Energy Group, which was a very big biofuels acquisition. So it's a pretty broad ecosystem in terms of where banks and financial institutions play a role. And I think in terms of your question on where are the unlocks, I would point to kind of two things. One is we certainly have a scale-up opportunity just in terms of amount of capital that needs to be deployed related to energy transition. Banks can play a role, but there's a lot of other folks in the ecosystem, sovereign wealth funds, asset managers, asset owners. And there's also different types of capital that need to be deployed, right? There's very different risk levels, risk return levels at different types of projects and technologies. So those projects for sustainable aviation fuel, the economics look very different than solar, for example. And so the ability to actually have capital deployed by different players in the ecosystem at different parts of the capital stack, right? So venture to growth, et cetera, is really important. So banks may not do all of those things, some of those things, and there's other important financial intermediaries. The second unlock I would point to, we're really talking about it, but I'll just say really directly, I think it's really important when you think about energy transition deployment, and we've done a lot of research on this at Goldman Sachs, to acknowledge that there's a lot of capital that actually needs to flow into the most carbon-intensive industries today to deliver on global climate goals, right? And that is, I think, a few years ago, early frameworks on kind of sustainable investing, I think often overlook that fact that if you really want to support real economy decarbonization in a world where energy demand is rising, not falling, one, the companies who actually can invest at scale in energy transition are also the companies that are providing secure energy today. So they need that capital, and they're going to have to determine optimization of where they put that capital over time. But that's really critical. And so to achieve real economy decarbonization, your portfolio may actually look like it has higher emissions today, but you're investing in companies that are going to really lead the energy transition and decarbonization over time. So I think those are the two things I would point to in the financing sector.
A footnote on that point too, I think one observation we saw in the lead up to COP28 is this invigoration of conventional energy companies thinking about where their place is in that ecosystem. It culminated in oil and gas decarbonization charter, right? 52 companies, 60% of which were national oil companies that don't respond to shareholders, that don't have the same drive to make that change. That conversation now moving forward, we talk about the global energy agenda being one milestone, but this is a continual momentum of change and policy and thinking. One area of this is, I think, transition finance. There's a lot of banks and a lot of financial institutions that are coming to us saying, well, maybe this is the framing in which we can invest in some of these conventional oil companies to actually help them achieve the methane near zero targets by 2030 and make room in a way that maybe wasn't as in vogue previously. So there's a really interesting dynamic happening there as well.
Gotcha. And then Michelle, another finding from the GEA survey, over 66% of respondents say, and to linger on the political issues again, they say that a lack of political will is actually an impediment to meeting net zero goals. So how do you overcome that? You mentioned your experience in Virginia and Arizona. I mean, how do you kind of communicate that?
Yeah, well, in order to have a successful strategy, you have to deliver impact. You have to deliver sustainability impact, whether that's through reduced carbon, cleaner energy, cleaner air, increased water. You have to deliver economic impact, and you also have to make sure that that economic impact is inclusive. And so that's what we try to do through the Microsoft efforts. I'm going to give you 3 different examples of how we've been able to do that. The first is in our supply chain. So we talked a little bit about the renewable energy procurement. As we were looking at our future projects, we saw one of the major bottlenecks was the availability of solar panels and the availability of American source solar panels here in the United States. And so we worked with Q-Cells, one of our partners, which is a solar module manufacturer, to think creatively about what we could do to help jumpstart that market. And so we contracted for 12 gigawatts of solar modules. That's equivalent to about 1.8 million homes. And that kind of demand signal has now created enough of incentive to build an investment plant, a production plant here in the United States that Q-Cells is building in Georgia. I think they announced it, a multi-billion-dollar plant. That's the first way. The second way is we've been seeing through the Climate Innovation Fund how when we've been coupling our investment with procurement alongside policy, it provides shovel in the ground projects. So one, we've been talking a little bit about sustainable aviation fuels. Microsoft was one of the investors in one of our partner portfolio companies is called LanzaJet. They develop sustainable aviation fuel together with the demand signal that's been happening and the policy support. They announced the opening of a new plant in the Southeast as well. We have another of the Microsoft portfolio companies, along with other investors, is Group 14. They develop advanced battery manufacturers, and so they're now developed a new plant in Washington State. We have the first direct air capture project. This is direct air, which is a technology that takes air, scrubs it of carbon, takes that carbon and puts it into long-term storage, either in bricks or underground, so that we can remove carbon. The first projects of these were outside the US. We now have, through Heirloom, which is another partner portfolio company of the SIF, along with other investors, broke ground and is now operating the first direct air capture project in Central Valley of California. All of these, the point is, these are new manufacturing plants. They're creating new jobs. They're creating new tax bases. They're also equally exciting, creating new industries and pathways for American workers. And so that's what's really exciting to see how this delivers economic impact. Let me get the third proof point, which is how do we make sure that this is inclusive and takes also brings along underserved communities. We're thinking about how do we do that through our renewable energy procurement. And instead of just providing direct investment or direct grants to communities, we thought, well, is there something here to do in project innovation and project design innovation? And so we partnered with 2 energy companies. One is Sol Systems, another is Volta, to develop a portfolio of, one is 500 megawatts, one is 250 megawatts of projects, of renewable energy projects that will be developed in underserved communities, where a portion of that revenue from those projects are allocated for local investment that they determine where it goes, and it determines either in environmental remediation or in skilling. We're also looking at other opportunities. We recently invested with closed loop in a renewable energy project in the Mississippi Delta. So to figure out ways that we can actually use our procurement to also reach a broader community and make sure that the renewable energy development extends and is more of an inclusive opportunity. So I think those are just a few ways of how we deliver both sustainability impact as well as economic impact.
Right, and of course we've seen renewables, play a major role during these geopolitical tensions in mitigating these conflicts and transitioning off fossil fuels. There's more of an awareness of the role that renewables can play. So, Landon, amid these tensions, how do you also, as renewables grow, ensure energy security and strike that balance?
Yeah, we talk about this a little bit in the report, and this, the concept. I mean, first and foremost, despite all of the tremendous and growing and outpaced investment in renewable energy, the global energy system still has reliance on nearly 80%, 78% on fossil energy, and so this is a little bit of a marathon. So I don't think that we should be taking these individually. I think we need to be thinking about them comprehensively. And there was a moment where we looked at renewable energy as, and I think we used the word panacea in the report. It's more complicated, right? As we come off of COVID and we think about supply chains and we think about diversification, the one through line and the one thing of continuity right now is in fact the sense that the same policies about diversification of suppliers, diversification of sources, diversification of technologies still is pretty salient in the context of new energy transition as well. I do think there's maturity in terms of having indigenous resources produced and producing energy at home is always going to further enhance energy security, but ultimately, we need to be thinking about where these resources are coming from. Kim can speak to this maybe even better than I can, because there's programs like PGII, the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, where we're talking much more comprehensively about these project sets, right? It's not just energy in a silo. It's saying, what is the full apparatus and infrastructure that needs to be built up to create the enabling environment, whether it's telecoms, hard infrastructure, railroads, whether it's the financial system, whatever it is in the developing world, which ties to, I think, the broader point too. Michelle talked about American workers. We spent a lot of time talking about individuals. There's a very human element to the energy transition. And I think taking that equilibrium at face value and making sure that we're pursuing sustainability in a way that's lifting a rising tide for everybody is going to have a much more accelerated pathway to achieving the climate aims we have in harmony with that political and economic stability that we need to make that happen.
Gotcha. And then turning to the international picture here with international diplomacy, I mean, we've seen out of the last couple of COPs some stronger commitments around reducing emissions, including at COP28, the final declaration around transitioning off of fossil fuels. So Kimberly, how do we turn those promises into action?
No, great question, and I think it's hard to not look at this COP that just happened as a hugely consequential one, because it really was in terms of the pledges made by both companies, as Landon spoke to, and countries. And I think we can point to a number of actionable items that came out of that Spec Carey is working and his team are working on every day, and we are working together with him to advance those goals. I'd say there's sort of three big pledges that the U.S., the EU, and the UAE work together on to get over 100 countries to sign up to that are really the most consequential: tripling renewable energy capacity, doubling energy efficiency, and ending unabated coal capacity by 2030. Those are huge wins, huge pledges, and really have the potential to help us advance our climate goals. I would just say, though, in terms of real practical steps, one issue that we are working on each and every day, and I've raised in many of my international meetings when I travel, and in fact have discussed with folks in this room today with us, is methane, right, and methane emissions, and particularly the global methane pledge, but just the fact that we cannot achieve our climate goals, we cannot keep 1.5 alive without significantly lowering methane emissions, and we cannot do that without partnering with the oil and gas sector. It's the place where it makes economic sense to reduce venting and flaring. Countries, they can benefit, they can use that as a resource, and it frankly is a gas that turbocharges climate change. And if we're going to keep 1.5 in sight, we have to tackle that. I think we made significant progress on that end in COP. We had the top 5 emitting countries, US, EU, Canada, Egypt, and Brazil, and sign up for regulations related to methane. And then we had 5 new countries sign up to the Global Methane Pledge, including Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Kenya, Romania, and Angola. So that is really an effort we continue to press on, and I think is really key in terms of meeting our climate objectives.
Cool. And just to close the panel portion here, I mean, what makes you optimistic in reaching net zero and meeting our goals? What are you hopeful about?
Sure.
Yeah, this is for anyone.
I'll start. I am really excited and optimistic about the potential for artificial intelligence to be able to really help us accelerate sustainability outcomes and addressing climate. Microsoft released a playbook on how we can use AI to accelerate our sustainability outcomes in November. And what it did is it highlighted 3 unique things that AI can do in this space. The first is on measuring, predicting, and optimizing complex systems. The second is developing new sustainability solutions. And the third is empowering the workforce. Let me give you a quick example of each. So in terms of the ability to measure and predict and optimize systems, we know that extreme weather events are causing a real challenge to be able to gather all of that information and understand better where those things are going to happen, what the pattern, what the things at risk and populations and installations at risk are of extreme weather events is huge. And last year, Microsoft partnered with the American Red Cross to be able to put this to work during the wildfires in Maui. We're partnering with the United Nations and other on the early warning systems for all to be able to do that more broadly around the world. The second is in developing sustainability solutions. And earlier this year, Pacific Northwest National Lab, which is one of the Department of Energy labs in partnership with Microsoft using generative AI as well as the high-performing computer, was able to go from, I think it was several million potential compounds in battery to narrow down to a single compound, which can drastically improve battery performance, which can reduce the lithium that's required by up to 70%. We talk about some minerals, and they were able to do this in a matter of days, what would have taken scientists years to do. So that's an exciting proof point of just how we humans can take generative AI to be able to deploy it and put it to work. The third is empowering the workforce. And here, an example is we work with a partner called TerraPraxis, and they are looking at closed coal plants and coal sites around the world to be able to repower them potentially, or what needs to happen to be repowered to them to be able to use small modular reactors down the road. And so by using AI, they're able to get a better sense of all of the different conditions that these sites have and how we can accelerate siting applications or permitting applications down the road to be able to use that. So think of that in your individual day. For example, we have a customer that's a local utility that was able to put thousands of dockets and proceedings into a large language model and be able to quickly process to be able to see what was happening in different utility proceedings. That takes time out of our individual day to be able to focus on the solutions rather than reviewing the content, and allows us to accelerate the time that we can deploy these energy solutions.
So I would say from a financing perspective, certainly technology innovation and just the pace that we've reduced the cost curves has been, I think, definitely a bright spot. I think the other area that's important to note, we talked a little bit less about today, but Landon importantly mentioned, is just the human component of energy transition and what a complex problem this is. We have close to 700 million people in the world without access to electricity. And I think one of the other big developments that happened at COP was you had the MDBs really stepping up and saying, we're going to deploy more of our balance sheet, put more capital specifically into emerging markets. So I think the public-private partnership and just kind of, I talked about the types of different capital that we need to deliver on decarbonization and support energy transition in a world where you also need to prioritize security of energy and energy access. Getting the development banks, seeing that commitment from the development banks and actually deploying, the World Bank is going to deploy about 45% of its balance sheet towards climate. So you're really going to see, I think, a shift, and that in my mind is an important bright spot, because there's certain markets where a blend of public-private financing is going to make more sense. Some markets it's going to be private capital, some it's going to be all public capital. So that to me is a really important development.
Yeah.
Please, Kim.
No, I would just say broadly, I think there is reason to be optimistic, especially out of COP. You had 200 governments for the first time ever call for the world to transition away from fossil fuels to achieve net zero by 2050, right? So that in itself is a cause for optimism. Now, of course, we have to implement that. I would just say, from a personal view, though, in the State Department, we run about 20 energy and climate dialogues around the world. My bureau participates probably in about another 70 dialogues on energy and climate with countries. And there's not a bilateral dialogue now with a counterpart country that does not involve how are we going to achieve our energy and climate goals, right? And that is a complete difference from when I started in the State Department some 20 years ago, right? So the fact of the matter is that this has risen to the top of almost all of our bilateral agendas. So we just see space every day working with partners to advance all of these goals.
And maybe to tie that together, I think when you look at the COP and you see industry at all scales, 100,000 people showing up in Dubai, the climate community should take note of success, because the diplomatic efforts over the last 27 COPs led to a moment where the global community, including oil and gas, including conventional energy companies, are looking at this problem set very cohesively and coming together. Not everybody's at the same pace and scale of ambition, but I do think that you have an environment ripe for progress. And a compliment here in Washington, D.C. too. I think when I started in the policy side, these were very parallel but very separate threads to pull on. You had a very firm climate community, a very firm energy community, and then finance somewhere in there too with Treasury when they wanted to helicopter in. And I think all of these things are becoming much more contiguous. The Biden administration in particular has put a lot of climate leadership into energy positions. That has different repercussions, but one thing it's doing is building continuity so people understand both the scale of the challenge for climate, but also the complexity of the energy system. And this isn't just whimsical. This is really, really hard work. So I just say that. And then Michelle, I think maybe next year we'll do an AI version too to complement the global energy agenda.
Cool. Well, that's it for the panel, but we wanted to, or at least the moderated panel, we wanted to open up for Q&A, and we have some pre-submitted questions, but anyone else who wants to ask a question, there's a mic right over there. We'll just start off, though, with one of the pre-submitted questions. That is a question around industrial policy, the increasingly popularity of that with the IRA. Of course, Europe is trying to deal with that and compete with that. So generally, do you see this kind of competition that we're seeing play out as good or bad for the energy transition?
Look, if we didn't have COVID and we didn't come out of that with the intent to have a really close look at our supply chains and how they're being managed, I don't know that you have the maturity to reach a product like the IRA and the motivation to do it. So there's a silver lining at least. I don't think that the answers the question directly, but in terms of industrial policy, when applied well, it can be really transformative. I think we have to be wary. And Shin Hosaka talks about this in his essay in the Global Energy Agenda on maintaining a global view, a partnership-based view on solving some of these challenges. Frankly, we can't do them unilaterally. And so maybe when I look at the industrial policy, I think there's a lot of merit. Jigar talked about the fact that the United States is actually competing, I think he said, to commercialize tech here. So there's some really positive aspects of this, but it's not, if done by itself, I think we're going to find ourselves in a deficient overall posture in the long run.
I'd like to click down what we've seen happen with policy around the world, if it's the United States, if it's the Industry Act and Green Industry Act, or that Zero Industry Act in Europe, there was a Canada legislation in Japan, was the evolution behind what's kind of conventional climate tech and renewables to industrial decarbonization, the harder to abate sectors. And that's a really important development because for so many, these are really hard to get to. If the technologies exist, they're incredibly expensive. and you need to bring the costs down, and you need to scale up the supply in order to really jumpstart the market. And so I think that development is incredibly important and critical to being able to hit both the global targets and the corporate targets that companies have made.
Gotcha. And then another question here from James Doolittle. He talks about how in the global energy agenda, one of the findings that he took away from it is how there's so many different energy technologies that are playing a role in reaching net zero. But he wants to know, is there a certain point where we should be picking and choosing kind of which of these technologies has the best chance at actually getting us to net zero?
Can I first point out I'm a former Air Force officer, and James Doolittle is a stage name because that's a very famous Air Force person. So, but nonetheless, I like the question. One facet of the survey was, which technology do you think is going to be the most impactful over a horizon? And what I found interesting about it is it was kind of a true all of the above. There was a very big sense of like, let's move all of this forward because we need all of this technology. So I'd say when it comes to specific technologies, no. When it comes to technologies within a vertical, possibly. So, when we talk about Gen 4 advanced reactors and SMRs, are 90 companies going to survive over the horizon to actually see this deployed at commercial scale? Probably not. I mean, just to be realistic. Now, I'm not saying we need to pick winners and losers. The market could do that too. But we do need to be cognizant of the fact that we may, getting behind and not being afraid to galvanize and push certain companies is not always a bad thing either, because we want these technologies all in the aggregate to make it.
And if we're going to reach a carbon-free electricity grid that is both firm, that's all, has electricity any hour that we need, that is going to require every tool in the toolbox. We're going to need it, and it's going to depend on local situations and local conditions, local political conditions, local resources, but that's going to mean needing every single technology to try and get there. And then you look outside of the electricity sector, we need to have green cement, we need to have green steel, we need to have sustainable aviation fuel, we need to have so many other things. So I was really excited to see the results of the survey and how much it had shifted from one single technology to almost evenly split between 15.
Right.
And of course, we cannot avoid a China question. So we have an anonymous question here, just around, of course, China's, it's expected to continue to increase its coal production, but at the same time, I mean, I just read a report, I think just yesterday, on how it's really lapping the world in manufacturing clean energy and deploying clean energy. More than we've ever seen. So how should the U.S. and international community kind of handle the China challenge around they're still increasing coal, but they're also deploying a lot of clean energy?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you said the question is the answer. We have to handle both, right? We had the Sunnylands Agreement, and obviously we're working more closely with the Chinese after that. But the proliferation of coal in China and unabated coal plants is a fundamental challenge. On the other hand, they are such an important part of the energy transition and such a major producer of all these green energy technologies. So I don't think there's one single simple answer. I think we have to pursue our climate goals, keep messaging and talking about the importance of getting rid of unabated coal. We really, unfortunately, could lose a lot of the gains that we've made if China keeps on building unabated coal plants. All the other progress we've made with clean technologies, if they continue down that path, at the same time, they of course are a hugely important part of the energy transition. So.
Yeah, I think it's an and, not an or.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's a tremendous amount of innovation that's coming out of China as well. So. If you look at EVs, EV supply chains, the cost reduction that's come down, and they've done some interesting things in the carbon markets as well. I mean, they have a very, very large carbon market that came online pretty quickly. And so I think it's not something that you can pick and choose, especially from a financial perspective. It's going to be an important part of the financing equation.
And we have a question here around the future of small modular nuclear reactors. Of course, there have been some stumbles here in the United States, but we are seeing Eastern Europe and Africa really have an interest in small modular reactors. So what can the U.S. do to better support the appetite from foreign customers for U.S.? There's tons of startups and other companies in the U.S. working on this technology. How do we, build momentum?
Yeah, well, from the government perspective, the State Department actually does have a program, the first program run out of one of our bureaus that works with countries that are interested in SMR technology. We bring groups of experts together to meet with foreign delegations, introduce them to U.S. companies, U.S. technology. We also do trainings overseas for interested ministries and interested companies. So I think we're really proud of that program. It's really helping introduce interested partners to U.S. technology, and we think is going to be an important tool to get U.S. technology out there on the market.
Ghana and Eastern Europe are obviously two very different markets. Ghana does not yet have a 123, a non-proliferation agreement with us, so there's a regulatory framework around this. Eastern Europe does. I think that there's an active engagement in helping both Poland and Romania build out their nuclear establishment. And what I would point out about this is we need to be thinking about the security ramifications of the nuclear sector as well. Nuclear policy is a 100-year relationship with countries. You start from the development stage all the way to decommissioning, and that is a century of continuity at the highest levels, and with very technical and capable communities with counterparts globally. And if we cede that space, if we don't engage, if we don't enter markets like Ghana, if we don't make sure Romania is doing it with the United States or at minimum a Western partner, then I think we're really making an error, because the only other people that are competing are China, are Russia, and I think Michał Kurtyka does a beautiful job really hammering down on the importance of nuclear energy and the European complex, particularly in the global energy agenda, but that is universal. Really, really important facet of foreign U.S. foreign policy as well.
Was really struck at COP28, just the conversations that were had around advanced nuclear, including small modular reactors, as well as the fusion energy event that the Atlantic Council hosted, and just really how the conversation and the recognition by more and more countries and more stakeholders that, like I said, we're going to need all the tools in the toolbox, and in the where local politics allow, advanced nuclear and fusion can play an important role. And I think in a month's time, the IAEA is going to have kind of one of the first nuclear power summits to really drill down on what needs to happen in order to get to that next stage of development.
Cool, and we do have a couple folks lined up at the mic, so yeah, if you wanted to ask a question.
Awesome. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name's Logan Carnicelli. I'm with the U.S. ASEAN Business Council. Our energy committee includes a very diverse energy portfolio, which includes oil and gas and LNG. In Southeast Asia, or the ASEAN region as a whole, for better or for worse, has an abundance of coal and have very heavy use in coal as an energy resource in an emerging market. And I was wondering to the panel, what, if any, do you see the role of continued LNG and or carbon capture and storage as a stepping stone in the energy transition for that region in particular?
I'm going to take the LNG question on its head. Obviously, it's a pretty controversial thing here in Washington, D.C. right now as we look at a pause on LNG exports. If we look at it objectively, a lot of people are right on all sides. There's a lot of build out of U.S. LNG infrastructure on the horizon the next 3 to 4 years. We had Maros Šefčovič here from the EU talking about this issue set, noting that there is supply on the horizon. I will say a pause in terms of the ability to replicate what we've seen in the United States from natural gas side of offsetting coal. Demand on energy, period, as we peak at over 8 billion people globally, is growing. We haven't seen any single fuel source ebb. And while the IEA may have forecasts for a flat demand outlook for natural gas, many others have a very comprehensive growth forecast for LNG. And so, from my perspective and the impact of U.S. leadership from the natural gas sector, I'd rather us be doing it and us enabling the exports because I think it has a profound impact on U.S. leadership globally. And frankly, we have more control then over the emissions portfolio and profile of that technology and that energy source anyway. So that answers the question on natural gas. When it comes to carbon capture, that goes straight in the bucket of all the tools we need in the belt. I think, yes, 3x renewable energy, awesome benchmark from COP28. Also effectively a prerequisite of achieving our net zero aims. So in some ways, yes, we need to be doing that, but let's not leave space and decarbonize as well and effectively put through that CCUS market and find a price signal for that supply as well. I think we have to do that.
I'll just add, I mean, the role I mentioned earlier, the role of blended finance and public-private partnership in emerging markets. I mean, this is critical. And one example I'll give is work that we did with Bloomberg Philanthropies and the Asian Development Bank. We launched a climate development fund 2 years ago, and the goal was to focus on India and Vietnam, kind of high emitting, middle income, and to pilot technologies that were not yet at commercial scale. And we did it through a blended finance structure. And what we were able to do was put in 25 million of capital between us and Bloomberg, and we were able to scale that 20 times, which is a very high multiple in a blended finance structure. And that came through credit guarantees from the Asian Development Bank and then crowding in of other private and public sector capital. So a little like proximate to your question, but I think is really important. It's not just two options in those markets, right? You do have a lot of focus by those governments of how to get more capital into those markets to fund low carbon solutions as well.
Cool. We are just a minute over, but did want to give audience member. Yeah, thanks for asking that.
Hi, my name is Harry Andriadis. I'll preface the question by saying I'm an engineer by training. So when we have assumptions or models, we usually try to validate them against empirical evidence. So my question goes to our policies currently. Has there been an effort to validate them against historical evidence, right? Whether they have provided a return on investment. And when I say return on investment, I mean in terms of decarbonization, in terms of increasing energy equity. Because this is, I think, the third time we've gone through the hydrogen economy in the 70s, 2000s, and now. Same thing with renewables. We've had them for about 50 years. It's a 50-year technology. But yet the headlines are still that we have 80% coal or fossil fuels in the energy mix. So my question is, have we tried to validate all of these policies against historical evidence?
I'm a lawyer by training, and so love people that have empirical evidence and deploy it. Look, I think that what I can speak to in this space, and when you travel the world globally, there is a rigorous effort, whether it's through actual information companies that are dealing with this from the S&P Globals or MSCIs, or public-private institutions, public institutions like the International Energy Agency, private institutions like the oil and gas companies that are all looking at evidence to drive forward a forecast for the future constructively. I think we're trying hydrogen, just to key in on that one piece, for a third time because there are few avenues to decarbonize the hard-to-abate sectors without it. And that's, I don't think, questionable. I think that that's just a reality. And what's changed between the 70s and 2024 is the fact that climate change isn't being questioned anymore. I think everybody, as you go to a forum like COP28, takes that at face value, realizes the very real consequence to global security that can have as well. And so we're pushing forward and pioneering economies that maybe wouldn't be your first preference if conventional energy didn't have the externality it did.
There's also the question of policy design, right? And what you're focused on and what you're optimizing for, right? And so we have lots of different policies in lots of different places. I mean, that's been an interesting discussion, right, between the United States and Europe in terms of the policy design. You can solve sometimes for carbon, but that's less politically, it's harder to build political support against that. You can solve for trying to have a particular energy mix, but once again, that also becomes more difficult politically. So, the further you get from the outcome you're trying to design to, maybe the bigger political support, but the harder to actually have direct correlation.
Cool. Well, yeah, I want to be cognizant of everyone's time and thank you all for being here and everyone watching online. Appreciate it. And thank our panel for a very informative, insightful conversation. So
Thanks, Josh.
appreciate it.
Thanks,
Yeah.